All right, it's Joe Bruen here with the All Access Entertainment Podcast, and we're here with our next guest, very special guest, photographer Roy London from the WWF. Roy, how are you today?
I'm feeling good today. I'm glad we worked out these technical disabilities, and now we're ready to go. Thank you for mentioning me with my time with the World Wrestling Federation, now World Wrestling Entertainment. But I did spend most of my wrestling career with Pro Wrestling Illustrated and the London Publishing Series. I started out there as an assistant, filing photos and putting things away and taking things out. They have a massive file cabinet collection. And over time, I worked my way up to be one of their photographers.
And let's talk about that. PWI, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, one of the most popular magazines that have ever come to be. Bill Apter, kind of the front man of that, and some of the mags were referred to as Apter mags all those years by collectors. What was the experience like getting hired by PWI and working with Bill?
Well, it's very funny because I started attending the wrestling matches when I was about 12 years old. And at the time, you had to be 14 to get into Madison Square Garden for WWF wrestling. It was a rough, mostly a Hispanic crowd, if I could say that. And it was a rough crowd. It's interesting how I broke into wrestling, and I'll tell you that in a second, but we collected all the magazines. The magazines went on sale at a candy store up the block every Tuesday. So Tuesday morning, we were at the candy store waiting for the guy to untie the bundles, and we'd buy all the wrestling magazines. We knew all the titles. We knew all the photographers and writers. And, of course, Bill Apter's magazines were our favorites. And when we went to Madison Square Garden, we used to see Bill and try to get Bill to sell us pictures. And he used to brush us off because we were just kids. But there was other magazines. There was a photographer, Frank Amato, who used to sell pictures to not everybody. He didn't stand on the corners hustling pictures. But if you got to know him, he had a little list that he'd send you of his photos, and he would sell them to you. And sometimes we would meet him outside the garden, and we'd order the pictures through the mail, and then he would bring them to the garden. And we would get to the garden early in the afternoon, right after school. The parents would put us on the Long Island Railroad all by ourselves. And we'd get into New York City, and we'd go to the back of Madison Square Garden where the wrestlers would walk in. And we had little Instamatic cameras that took 110 cartridge film. And we would try and stop the wrestlers and photograph them. And Lou Albano was the first guy in. He was there it was one Monday a month, and he was the first guy in at 4:30. And when I got older and joined up with WWE, they let me know, Lou was there at 4:30 because if he came any closer to when the matches started, he would have gotten killed. So he had to be the first guy there in the early afternoon, so that when he'd get in and just wait and do whatever he did. But we collected all the matches. It's interesting. I started telling you yesterday how in the late 70s, when black and white televisions were being faded out, every family had a giant black and white console TV in the living room that you couldn't even bring to a repair shop. The repair guy used to come to your house and replace the tubes.
Right.
Well, my parents got a small colored television, and this is a good explanation for some of the younger listeners that are out there. I never hear anybody discuss this anymore because everybody's talking about Netflix and Peacock. But there was a time when televisions had a station dial on the television set, and it was from 2 to 13, and each channel went click, 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 click. And it was like every other channel had programming. Of course, there were the 3 networks, and then 2 syndicated channels, and PBS for educational programming. But then between 2 and 13, there was a letter U, which stood for UHF. So you put that dial on U, and then there was another dial underneath that, and that had numbers 14 through 83. but it didn't click. You just turn it until you got some kind of picture. And when you did get a picture, you'd realize, oh, it's the same thing from Channel 13, public broadcasting, Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers. But then if you went a little further, you'd see more fuzz. And then you get a clear picture and you'd fight with the little antenna. And it was a Spanish network. And the Spanish networks, there were two of them, they showed the wrestling. And it was one Saturday night, and we were playing around with this dial. My parents went away, and my friends and I were playing with it. And we came across the wrestling show from Los Angeles. And we didn't know what it was. And the next Saturday, I put it on again, and my father was home this time. I said, Dad, is this boxing? What's going on? There was a big 600-pound or 400-pound guy in overalls. His name was Man Mountain Mike. And he had two guys wrestling him, Black Gordman and Great Goliath. But they weren't wearing gloves. So I was a little confused because I knew boxing, but I didn't know what this was.
Right.
And then when I brought my dad in, he kind of laughed and he got a kick out of it and said, your grandparents used to watch this when it first started. Years ago, this was very popular on TV with a wrestler named Gorgeous George. And I asked my grandparents, everybody knew who Gorgeous George was. But this was, in the 50s and 60s. But I'm watching this in the late 70s. And then I was telling my friends about this. And wrestling in my little clique, in my little neighborhood, caught on pretty quickly. And then another friend of ours said, you're watching the wrong show. That wrestling's horrible. That's terrible. What you need to do is put on Friday night at 11 o'clock and go to the other Spanish channel and you'll see WWWF. That's the real wrestling. The other stuff is fake. But when I was watching it, they were interviewing Ernie Ladd, and he was so angry, he was foaming at the mouth. And my father came in and started laughing. And I said, Dad, I know what you told me, but I think this guy is for real. He's really angry. You can't fake that. He's foaming from the mouth. And my dad just laughed and said, I'm glad you're enjoying this. And then a couple of months later, one of the dads loaded up a station wagon. Listen to this. He loaded up a station wagon to drive all the kids to Madison Square Garden. So we gave him money. He loaded up the car. He took us about halfway to the city. Then he took us out of the car. He said, we're going to leave the car here. We're going to go on the railroad. And this time the railroad was halfway in. So we got on the railroad. We got into the basement of Madison Square Garden. The good thing about Madison Square Garden is it's above a railroad station. So if you're out in the suburbs, your parents would put you on a train, and they knew there was nowhere else you can go except the basement of Madison Square Garden. You
Right.
knew which escalator you needed to go up. You went right into the garden. So the father took all us little kids, and the ticket taker, the usher, wouldn't let us in because we were 11 or 12 years old. You had to be 14. But for some reason, I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, and the guy took my ticket, said, go right upstairs, son. And I went upstairs. They had cheaper seats, and I was the only one there. The kids were gone. They didn't follow me, and I didn't turn around to see if they were behind me. So I got stuck in Madison Square Garden. Imagine that. My first time in my life. I was maybe 11 years old in the city. So I got to a payphone. I was calm. I called my father. And it's funny that the parents, the father who took us, the wife called my family and said, we lost Roy. But I called up, and Madison Square Garden was great back then. The security found me, and they rendezvoused me with my dad. And they took me home. And my dad had to park in the parking garage. And when we went to the parking garage to get his car, the show wasn't over yet, but they took me home. And Tony Gurria was in the parking lot. And I told him what happened, and he signed my autograph program. And then later on, when I worked for the WWE and I got to meet Tony Gurria, I told him this story, and he got a kick out of it. And Tony Gurria was a great guy. One of the first guys to have tattoos on his arms before
Hmm.
everybody else started doing it. Tony Gurria had them. And Tony Gurria, back in the 70s, every territory had one gimmicked wrestler that was like a handsome young baby face. They had Rick Martel in one place and Guerrero's in California, but Tony Gurria was the good looking young babyface gimmick, and he was very popular. So anyway, we got into the wrestling. I collected all the magazines. I went to art school. I studied photography, and I had some good jobs through my art school. They hooked you up with very good jobs at my art school, and I was doing photography at some very prominent art studio, photography studios, even doing black and white processing. And one of my friends said, Roy, if you look in the paper, there's an advertisement for a publishing company that photographs wrestling and boxing, and they're looking for a boxing editor or a wrestling editor to work in the photos. So I applied, and then I found out it was Bill. And I used to bother Bill back when I was a kid, and to try to get him to sell his pictures, but he wouldn't. And then anyway, I went for the interview, and Bill gave me the job, filing pictures and cutting. What the magazines that were printed used to come back in big negative sheets, and they used to have me cutting them up into page size. It was actually a long sheet of all the pages connected, and I used to have to cut the pages and put them into a folder. And then, as I mentioned, I was in the right place at the right time because Bill, who did all the photography for London Publishing, and all the photography belonged to London Publishing, so Bill would never be able to sell or lend anybody photographs. But I got lucky because wrestling had just taken off. It was the start of the third WrestleMania, and Bill had just started a family and had just gotten married about 3 years ago. So he had two little children. And Bill, who was on the road practically his whole bachelor life, got married and wanted to be a family man. He didn't want to go on the road anymore. And Craig Peters, who was one of the top writers, a very talented writer, was also very handy with cameras. And so was Bob Smith, who was one of the top writers. So they had very capable photographers and writers, but they all started families. And I didn't have a family yet. So they didn't want to go traveling on the road. Bill was in Philadelphia 1,000 times. He didn't want to go there anymore. So they let me go. And I got to know the wrestlers and the promoters. I got to know my way around, and I became the photographer and taking Bill's place.
That's awesome. That's
And
a great story.
I was telling you the story yesterday. A lot of people are interested when I remind them that when I worked at the WWE and we were at ringside, I had strict instructions to, they gave me a spot and I had to stay in the spot. If there was big action on the other side of the ring and the wrestlers were about to do a finish, I couldn't run over there and photograph the finish because I guess Steve Taylor and Tom Buchanan, the main photo people, they say, Roy, if the fans want to see the finish, they can watch it on TV. You don't need to photograph it. Their photography in their magazines were more pose oriented or on location oriented. They weren't really interested in capturing the finishes because they can capture it on television. But
Sure.
when you worked for PWI, they wanted you to capture all the finishes so the magazines would look spectacular with the guys diving and rolling all over the place. So if I saw Cactus Jack climbing the corner turnbuckle, I'd run to the other side to get in the spot to see him dive. So when I started doing that in WWE, the cameraman and Tom would say, no, 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 no. You need to stay out of their way. So it really wasn't about the WWF worried about competition with the other magazines because Vince McMahon and his wife, they loved Bill and George Napolitano. They considered them friends. They didn't consider them competition. They were part of the wrestling family. But they didn't want anybody in the way of the cameramen for television. They wanted the ring area clean. And that made sense because if you watch the WWF shows that I watched from the late 70s in Madison Square Garden, there's photographers climbing all over the ring.
Right.
But when they started doing real syndicated big production television, the ring looks nice now with the uh, they have the barrier around the ring and everything is colorful and color coordinated and there's no people cluttered. You can even see their photographers now. I don't know who their current photographers are, but you can see they're even more tucked in the corner than we were. I
Yeah.
had a little leniency to walk around a little bit, but the new guys, you can see them on TV. They're like wedged in the corner. They don't want them to move. But their TV looks great, and nobody can deny that.
I know Rich Frida is still there.
Rich Frieda, that sounds familiar. Okay, I
Yep.
think even Rich did some photography for Bill at one point.
Yep.
But one thing that I don't hear a lot of people talking about on the other podcasts is, I know Bob Smith has a wonderful podcast, and people have interviewed Craig Peters and Stu Sachs has been interviewed, but they don't interview the photographers. And I always teased Craig and said, Craig, the kids aren't buying your magazines to read your stories. They want to see my pictures.
That's
They're
true.
not
That was the
hanging your
best part.
stories. They're not hanging your interviews on the wall, but they're hanging my pictures up on the wall of the bedrooms. The posters are up, the pinups. So the photography is what counts. The writing supports the pictures, not the other way around. But
Right.
it was all in good humor and all in good jest. And a lot of times the writers used my suggestions. I often would be filing pictures, and I could hear the writers scratching their heads for an idea, and I'd be filing pictures, and I'd shout an idea out. They go, "Oh, Roy, that's great." One time, Craig Peters collects comic books like I do, and we went to the comic book store lunchtime, and I came back, and I was finishing my lunch, enjoying a comic book, and Bill was on the phone with Dusty Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes had just hired a big, huge guy, and they were trying to figure out what to do with him. So I said, Bill, tell Dusty to call him the Master Blaster. That's what I'm reading in the comic book. And Dusty heard me, and he loved the idea. And he put the guy like in Vietnam kind of camouflage with I don't know if they had weapons or guns, but he was the Master Blaster. And you remembered that yesterday. You told me Kevin Nash,
Kevin
and I
Nash.
think Kevin Nash later on said, "Oh, he hated that gimmick." But Dusty always called Bill 10 times a day, and I always answered the phone because Bill got a lot of phone calls. Bill's phone rang constantly, and Bill didn't have text messages and internet, so it was all done by phone. So Bill could be on another phone in a conference room, and his phone would ring, and it was my responsibility to answer it. And a lot of times it was Dusty, so he got to know me, and Dusty liked me a lot and let me come in the back in the dressing room and hang around. And he kicked other photographers out, but he let me stay. So when I saw Dusty's son on TV winning the championship, I was thrilled. It meant a lot to me. I'd love to meet Dusty. Cody Rhodes.
Cody, yeah.
I'm still a fan in a lot of ways, and I still get caught up in the excitement. And this is what I tell people. I get people telling me all the time, especially like little kids in elementary school, when I talk about wrestling. Oh, my dad said wrestling's fake. It's phony. And I said, it's not at all. And when I meet the dads, this is my explanation. And think about this, Joe. All the wrestlers are competing for the same thing that the Major League Baseball players, the NBA guys, the NFL guys are competing for. And you know what that is? Not the trophy, not the championship, the contracts. All the athletes today and their agents want the big contracts. I think the contracts are more important now than the championships.
Yeah.
So all the big athletes want the big contracts, and so do all the professional wrestlers. So to get the big contract in wrestling, you have to be the biggest performer that can draw the biggest crowds, right?
Right.
So that being said, these guys go out there every night trying to outperform the other wrestler because that's where the big contracts are.
Sure.
And while they might know who's going to win the match, we don't know. And we don't know how it's going to happen. So there's still that element of surprise and competition, especially when I watch the pay-per-views on the Peacock channel.
Yeah.
I'm sorry they took those off the Peacock channel because I was looking forward to those on Saturday nights, the 2-night WrestleManias. You
Yeah.
watch it now to watch their performance. And if you listen to Jim Cornette, he makes a lot of sense. And you got to watch these guys. And Jim Cornette pointed out the other day that these guys stood there and they punched each other 48 times, and none of them felt it. But then the next guy did a clothesline, and they all fell down. So how do you fall down from one clothesline after not getting hit by 48 punches and not falling down? So
Yeah.
the guys have to remember that. But those are the subtle points of this performance. So the really good performers make the big contracts, just like other professional athletes. So in that sense, it's very real. It's very competitive. Especially you realize now in the Major League Baseball, there's 30 teams. How many teams are left in professional wrestling? Two or three on television.
Yeah.
And so there's not a lot of spots.
Right.
You know, the NFL puts 11 guys on the field. The AEW now they have 6 guys in the ring at a time. But you see where I'm going with this? So
Sure.
the guys are very competitive in that sense. So I'll never let anybody stand next to me and roll their eyes and say wrestling is fake or phony because it's not. It's not.
Right.
And the idea is the fans think the other wrestlers are trying to hurt each other. But if you look at the big picture, it's not about hurting people. It's about trying not to hurt somebody.
Yeah.
I always loved that Bret Hart told people his finest accomplishment, his most proudest accomplishment in wrestling was, as he says, he worked 1,000 matches and never hurt anybody. And I think Bret Hart's a real champion in that sense of the word. And I always admired Bret. I photographed him and his family for the PWI magazines and the WWE magazines. The WWE actually sent me and Keith Greenberg to the Hart family house in Calgary in the dead of the winter. And it was a wonderful experience. It was interesting. They kept their keys in the cars. They didn't lock their cars up. The door of the house was never locked. And they told me, no, around here you don't lock anything up. And if you don't leave the keys in the car, you'll never find them. So we know where they were. And I said, you're not worried about anybody stealing your car? And he said, well, one guy tried to steal our car back in the 70s and the 80s. And my father found him. And the guy would have been better off if the police caught him, because my
Right.
father put him to work and really worked the guy over. And then he told the guy, look, either I call the police and have you arrested, or you come here and you shovel snow for the next 6 months. And Brett said the guy was outside the house shoveling snow for his father for the next 6 months because he didn't want to get charges. But it worked out. It was a great time. And Bret Hart's mother grew up in a neighborhood right next to my neighborhood in a town called Long Beach. And I lived in Rockaway Beach, but I worked in Long Beach. So when I met Bret Hart's mother and she heard my accent, and I told her I'm from Long Beach, her eyes lit up like she hasn't met anybody in Long Beach since she left, and she's 1,000 miles away, and she wouldn't let me out of the house. In fact, she told me and Keith to cancel the hotel and come stay with them because she loved my accent. She loved me. She was a nice woman. I felt like she was stuck in Calgary, Alberta. Her whole life was in Long Beach, but she was up there with the wrestlers. But what sweet, nice people. I loved them very much.
Yeah,
A
she
great
seemed like a very sweet lady. How was Stu?
Oh, Stu is amazing. Stu, first of all, as he got older and he would forget things or maybe stutter or something, and people would kind of tease him about it. People don't realize where he came from and how he grew up. And nobody today would make it if they had the same circumstances Stu Hart lived through. And he came out with a whole box of pictures and programs, and he would start telling us stories about this guy and that guy, and the other kids. I think Ross's son Ross was helping him put all this historical information together. And Ross would say, "Oh, I only heard this story 10,000 times, but here we go again."
Right.
And I never, me and Keith especially, Keith was eating up these stories. We stayed there for hours drinking coffee and listening to, and yeah, that was a great experience meeting the Hart family.
Yeah,
And
Ross.
I think I told you I met Chief Jay Strongbow, and a lot of people was for some reason skeptical of him. He had some kind of reputation amongst the office or the performers, but he saw me fiddling around with lights one day backstage, and he introduced himself. And I told him, Chief, man, when I was a kid, I was here in the garden and I heard you raise the roof. They raised the roof for Chief Jay Strongbow more than Pedro or Bruno. They always had Chief Jay Strongbow wrestling Mr. Fuji,
Hmm.
and they didn't do anything. Mr. Fuji would squeeze his neck while the chief sat on the mat, and Fuji would just look around making faces. And Mr. Fuji was scary back in those days before he became with the tuxedo and the manager.
Yeah.
When Mr. Fuji was wrestling, he was scary. And he just would hold Chief Jay Strongbow's neck like he was in a nerve pinch. And they'd sit on the mat. And then you see the chief trying to get up. And the garden had like these aluminum floors, and everybody would stomp their feet. It was so loud, and the chief would be on his feet and he'd fall down again. And then the garden would start stomping, and he would get up and he'd fall down. And this place was loud. It blew the roof off. I never heard anything like this. And I was telling the chief, and he was very flat, and he took a liking to me. So I said, Chief, you know what we missed most of all? We loved when you were the tag team champion, and you had Sonny King as your partner. And Sonny King back in there was like a cool alpha male type of Shaft or Superfly. I said, you need a guy like that. And I photographed a champion wrestler for the Atlanta office named Ron Simmons, and he fits that bill. And I don't think he's the champ anymore or doing much. I think somebody should try and get a hold of him. And Chief liked the idea. And then when we was hanging out with Bruce Pritchett. I knew Bruce back from my Texas days with a promoter named Paul Bosch. Another great story. Another Jewish Long Islander who was a promoter out in Texas, Paul Bosch, who took a liking to me. But I knew Bruce from him, and I said, Bruce, I was just telling the chief, you need to bring back like a black alpha male, like Sonny King. I said that was a great draw back then. And he said, yeah, I like that. I might talk to them about that. And then a couple of weeks later, after I left, I saw they brought in Ron Simmons, and they had the Nation of Domination. And I said, man, that was my idea. They took my idea and they used it, and it made me feel great that they
Yeah.
liked my suggestion.
Yeah,
And
Ron had a great presence, and when he became Farouk, he kind of upped that presence even more. I mean, it's such a what an entrance.
yeah, but they stayed true to the alpha male, which I was hoping. I mean, we love Coco Beware, but he wasn't like the alpha male like
Sure.
Shaft or Superfly that was really hip. I don't know if you remember Sonny King, but
Oh yeah.
Sonny King was like a bad mother,
Yeah.
And another great story that you're gonna like is there was a boxer named Marvin Hagler who was a champion boxer, and he was making a comeback in the '90s, and he was training in Massachusetts.
That was Marvelous Marvin, right?
Marvelous Marvin. And we worked very closely with the boxing magazines that London Publishing owned. In fact, we were all in one big room. And the boxing was on one side, the wrestling was on the other. And there was a lot of ribbing in between, but good natured. And we all got along really well. But the boxing guys got a phone call that Marvin Hagler was making a comeback, and he's training up in Massachusetts. And could Bill get on a train and go up to Massachusetts and take pictures? And Bill wanted to go home and play with the kids. He didn't feel like getting on a train. And I think I had something else scheduled with wrestling. So they didn't have anybody. Bill says, listen, Kowalski is in Massachusetts. He's got to know some photographers. Let me call him. So they call up Killer Kowalski. And Bill asks, Killer, I need to get a photographer up in Massachusetts. Do you know anybody? And the killer says, well, Bill, you know that I've dabbled in photography my whole life. He even had a book come out at one
Yeah.
point. So
Yep.
Bill was a little skeptical. He goes, I don't have anybody. All right, all right. I'll put you in touch. I'll put you in touch with Marvin Hagler. So Bill tells Stu Sachs, listen, the killer Kowalski is going to photograph Marvin Hagler. And Stu is like, oh, come on, Bill. What are you doing? This is serious. We need, nice pinups. Are you sure this is going to work? And Bill said, well, we'll give it a try. If it doesn't work out, we'll send Roy up next week, or Al Bello, or Kevin McManus. And Marvin Hagler was like, Killer Kowalski, really? Oh, I remember Killer was a kid. I can't believe you got Killer Kowalski to take my picture. Yeah, send him over, or I'll go to him, whatever you need. And long story short, when the pictures came out, beautiful studio photography,
Wow.
beautiful pictures of Marvin Hagler training, better than Bill or I could have done. Killer Kowalski was not only a brilliant vegetarian fitness guru, he was a master photographer and a brilliant man. And one of the first wrestlers I saw on television when I was 9 or 10 years old, and scared the crap out of me. Those guys back in those days came on television and they scared you. George the Animal Steel was like Jacob Fatu.
Oh
As
yeah.
crazy as Jacob Fatu is today, and you got to love Jacob Fatu, all
Yep.
brakes, no gas.
Yeah.
I tell the kids in school, they go, Mr. London, you're excited. I said, Mr. London's crazy today. I'm all gas, no brakes. We got to get this work done. Let's go. I told you when I was a school teacher for 23 years after I got out of wrestling, and my main mentor for teaching was Fred Rogers. You know Mr. Rogers on TV. I took the same approach. I was calm. I was kind. I was polite. I never talked down to any children. And I had all the children's respect. All the teachers couldn't figure out why did the children love Mr. London. Because Mr. London was kind to them. He was sweet. But because I was the art teacher, I tell the kids, if I see any dirt on the floor, I'm going to get funky like a monkey. And if I see a kid out of a chair, he had to put his body prone. I turn on the Dusty Rhodes accent and I say, get your seat, body in the chair, and put your body prone. And I get a little crazy sometimes, like all brakes, no gas.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I give myself a lot of credit hanging out with these wrestling guys on how to address the kids in the classroom. A lot of teachers would stand in the class and get a little flustered and scream at the kids. And I did the opposite. If a kid was acting up, I would put my head down and walk very quietly over to the kid. And the class was like, ooh, what's Mr. Lynn going to say to him? And I'd whisper in the kid's ear. And you know this quote if you're a wrestling fan. I'd whisper in the kid's ear, we could do this the easy way, or we could do this the hard way. And the kid would go, oh, no, let's do this the easy way, Mr. London. I said, good choice, because art is going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. Let's get along. And I give him a fist bump. I never had any problems because I never yelled at the kids, but I would go up to them very quietly and say, well, you could do this the easy way, or we can do this.
Right.
And they never heard that before,
Yeah.
or if the kids are getting a little wild, I think about Ric Flair, and I had a little harmonica. And if the kids heard me play the harmonica, they'd look at me and they'd get quiet and they'd say, I need to know what's causing all this. Remember that line? I need to know what's causing all this.
Yep.
And so, but the kids never knew where I was getting these lines from. They just say, oh, Mr. London. So I was able to use wrestling to become a good school teacher. And if you could see behind me, there's a poster of Bruno Sammartino.
A living
It
legend.
was a documentary about 5 or 10 years ago, and we all saw it. It was on public broadcasting. But the library was going to sponsor a showing of Bruno's film. And when I went to check out some books, I saw the poster, and the librarian and I were friendly because I've helped her with some art classes. And I told her, I said, I probably know more about Bruno Sammartino than anybody who's going to be attending this program you're showing. And if I didn't have to work in school that day, I'd probably like to come and talk about Bruno. And I showed her a picture of me and Bruno, and I explained to her how I knew him. And Bill Apter and Bruno were very close. He would contact Bruno all the time, and Bruno called Bill all the time. And it was funny because sometimes the wrestlers would call Bill and say, Bill, I'm going into Rhode Island for the first time. Where should I stay? Any good restaurants and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Bill say, oh, yeah, you got to go down to the pub on the corner. And the guy's name is Rich. Tell him you're a friend of mine, and you'll be taken care of it. So the guys would call Bill all the time for little information like that. And Bruno was on the phone all the time. And Bruno came up to the office once or twice, and he was a real gentleman. And I love the story Bruno told that he took his family to Italy and he met the Pope. And he said, I would love to have a photograph of you with my family. He said to the Pope, and the Pope says, oh, we really don't do photographs. It's not my thing, but I'll do a photograph for you. And they took a picture with the Pope and said, but you got to promise me, Bruno, I never do this. Please don't use this in magazines or for wrestling or anything. And Bruno said, oh, no. This will be on my mantelpiece over my fireplace, only for my family. And when Bruno told Bill, as soon as he got back to New York, Vince McMahon Sr. was rubbing his hands, licking his lips, going, oh, a picture of Bruno with the Pope. That's going to sell magazines and programs. And Bruno said, no, I promise the Pope this stays in my living room. And if there's one person you do not disappoint or lie to, it's the Pope. And Bruno kept his word. I really admired Bruno for that story. And Bruno was a real gentleman, a real classy guy. We always liked him when he came up to the studio. And Mil Mascaras came up to the studio, and he was wearing his mask. And Bill said when he came off the train, he wasn't wearing a mask. And nobody knew who he was. He looked like a businessman. And then Bill drove him up to the office, and before he got out of the car, he put on a mask. And it was interesting because Mil Mascaras has traveling masks.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, the masks he wore in the ring were very heavy, but the travel masks were a very light, thin material, so this way he doesn't perspire.
Right. Well,
But it was great meeting Mil Mascaras. I was trying to get him to sell me a mask because he gave Bill a mask, and Bill raffled it off for some kind of charity. And then Bill had another mask that he used to wear in the office, and we would take pictures. And we'd had wrestling matches in the office, and Bill was the office champ. But he pulled a move on Andy Rodriguez, and I think kind of got the belt.
Gotcha.
That's still an old story that we never got to the bottom of how Bill got the office championship from Andy Rodriguez. But did I tell you that Bill was great friends with Sting? And when Sting was a champion, we did a lot of nice photography of Sting. And he came to New York with Lex Luger. And Lex Luger was also one of my favorite guys. I traveled on the bus with Lex Luger for the WWE for the summer, and I got to
Electric
know him.
Express.
And he was a brilliant guy, really intelligent, really knowledgeable about science and fitness and his body. And he wasn't arrogant or pompous at all, like a lot of people thought. He's just, I'm a new guy in this business. I don't know my way around, so I stay quiet.
Yeah.
But he was really a brilliant guy. He taught me a lot about exercise and fitness. And so I was sad when I saw him on TV in a wheelchair. But long story short, one of my art projects, I used to do paper mache faces with my students. And one of the kids was a big wrestling fan, and he wanted to do a face of Sting. So he did one of Sting's later faces. And I asked Bill, I said, "You aren't in touch with Sting any." I still keep in touch with Bill. And I asked him if he had Sting's email, and he gave it to me. And so he emailed Sting a picture of the kid with holding the face. And I was surprised. Sting emailed me back the same day and said, "Wow, that's really cool. Um, that's really cool. I'm glad the kids still remember me. I haven't been on TV in years, and the kids love me, and that makes me feel so good." And I showed the kids a letter, and it was a big deal. And one of another nice things I did at London Publishing was for one of the sister magazines. I believe it was Sports Review Wrestling. I came up with a crazy idea. I said, "What if we took a picture of Sting without his makeup and print it in the magazine and have a contest that the kids would draw Sting's face?" And I think Stu Sachs shook his head and said, "Nope, no, 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 we don't do that because we're not going to show the fans what Sting looks like. It's like putting Mil Masters in the magazine without his mask. We wouldn't do that."
Right.
But when Bill asked Sting about the idea, Sting loved the idea. He said, "Yeah, no, man, that's awesome. In fact, sometimes I run out of ideas for my face, so this will give me ideas." So Sting loved the idea, and I took a nice straight headshot of Sting. We put it in the magazine, and that magazine sold more issues than it ever sold before. And we were getting letters every day of pictures of Sting with the makeup. And Sting was a real gentleman. He kept his word. He went through this pile of pictures, took his time. He found one he really liked. He did the makeup. We photographed him. He wrestled the pay-per-view wearing the fans' design. And it was a good thing that I take a lot of credit for.
What are
So
some of your
I had a few good shining moments at London Publishing, in addition to writing and photography, the writing.
What are some of your favorite shots that you took? Anything stand out during your time with PWI specifically?
Well, I think one of my favorite shots I did was a photo of Mike Tyson for the Ring magazine.
Oh yeah,
And if you'd like, I'll show it to you.
sure,
Okay, sorry for the delay.
no problem.
Um, it's not really my favorite, but it's a very wonderful photograph
Oh, that's beautiful.
that I'm proud of.
And what
Um,
year was that,
let's see,
roughly?
1990.
90.
And when I took the picture of Mike Tyson, it was in a big auditorium where there was a lot of other photographers, and Mike walked around the room, and you had like 5 minutes with he had 5 minutes with each photographer, so it wasn't just me photographing, and it was other photographers. But I knew he was a wrestling fan. So when I said to him, "Mike, can you growl like George Steele? Give me your best crazy face." And he turned around for me and he gave me that snarl. And Mr. Weston, the owner of London Publishing, he loved the picture, and he gave me a little envelope with some money in it. And he said, "We love your picture, and this is a little bonus." And he said, "I want you to take your wife out for dinner." So Mr. Weston really loved that picture. But I asked Mike to do the wrestling pose because I knew he was a wrestling fan, and I brought him a bag of wrestling magazines. And Mike, and I gave it to him, and he was thrilled, like, "Oh, I'm going to read these on the planes." And then when I got back to the office, Mr. Weston was mad at me, and we love Mr. Weston, so we can never say anything bad about him. But he had his pipe, and he was so mad. He said, "God damn it!" He goes, "Don't give out any magazines. Tyson can buy the magazines. He makes enough money. Let him go pay for them. Don't give out any magazines." And I said, "Oh, but he loved the magazines." And Mr. Weston knew that I gave him the magazines, and he warmed up to me, and that's how I got him to relax. And do the crazy pose, and he appreciated the magazines, and he always helped us out. But yeah, but you can't see Mike Tyson walking to a candy store to buy wrestling magazines. He's not going to go out and buy wrestling magazines.
Sure, yeah,
Well, when I gave it to him and he was going to read them on the plane, he was thrilled to death.
right.
So that was the thing. Mr. Weston was a wonderful man. One time there was a big blizzard in New Jersey. There was a big wrestling show in New Jersey, a pay-per-view, and there was a blizzard. And we weren't sure if they were going to cancel the show, but Mr. Weston wanted us to use his Cadillac because it was a big, heavy car. He says, "You'll be safer in my Cadillac." And Mr. Weston would let people sleep at his house. He'd give you money for food, anything you needed. I think when Bill's wife might have gotten sick, Mr. Weston helped him out. Mr. Weston helped out a lot of people. But if you found out that you gave away even one of the wrestling magazines, he beat the crap out of you. He'd give you anything the guy owned. He was a millionaire. He'd have a house, a boat, whatever you needed. But do not give out those magazines. So we had a lot of fun sneaking the magazines. In fact, I think when Mr. Weston sold the wrestling company, he put all the magazines in a dumpster and he hosed them down. So
Oh my gosh,
they wouldn't take them out of the dumpster and sell them. So that was a funny thing. But I think we took some out anyway and dried them.
of course.
Yeah, no, Mr. Weston took good care of everybody, even Bill. Bill, I don't know if Bill wants to admit it, but he took good care of Bill. And I was telling you yesterday a funny story.
Yeah.
We were in the Meadowlands, and I was telling Bill Apter that I think when he's ready to do his, remember, Bill Apter wrote a wonderful little book called His Wrestling Fixed.
Oh
And
yeah.
I said, Bill, the next book has to be called The Stories Bill Forgot. Because Bill forgot a lot of the stories. And I won't divulge on Bill's territory. Let Bill tell you his stories. And so he could write the book and get the credit. But my favorite story of Bill's was we're in the Meadowlands Arena. And we got there early to set up studio equipment. And we were in a room. I forgot who you were talking to. But all of a sudden, you could hear banging in the hall. There was somebody in the hall throwing a fit. You could hear furniture being thrown. You could hear the walls being punched. You could hear yelling, screaming, cursing. We go out in the hall, and it's Leon White, I think his name was, Big Van Vader.
Oh yeah.
And he was fuming. And I told people this was like a cartoon where they have a bull in the cartoon and his eyes are spinning in spirals and the steam coming out of the bull's nose. That's what Leon White looked like. He was completely red and angry and throwing chairs and throwing over lockers, whatever he could find. And people were running away from him. And it turned out, I think he was angry at a payoff he got from a pay-per-view. So anyway, Bill, who's known for his impeccable timing, walks up to him and says, "Oh, Leon, if you got a minute, we have the studio set up next door, and I don't have any new headshots of you for the magazines. Would you mind doing a headshot?" And this is in the middle of a tantrum. And
Right.
he looks at Bill with these eyes, and he goes, "You son of a bitches! You guys have those magazines, and you've been selling them for years, and the boys don't see a nickel, and you guys are making millions. Fuck you! And God damn it!" And he's cursing Bill. He's ready to kill Bill. And Bill goes, "You know what, Leon? You're absolutely right." And Bill takes out his wallet from his back pocket. He opens it up, and Bill didn't have hardly any money in the wallet, but he pulls out $5. He says, "Leon, you're absolutely right. I want to pay you for the headshots." And he gives him $5. And Leon just stops. And he looks down, and he wipes his face. He goes, "Bill," he puts his hand on Bill's shoulder. He goes, "Bill, I'm really sorry. I just lost myself. I got excited about something." Sure. And he was laughing. He goes, "I'll be happy to come in and do some pictures for you." So no one would go near this guy. It was a lunatic. But Bill, brave, walks up to him, gives him $5.
And
And
put
here's a guy
anybody
who,
in.
tips more than $5 gives out more than $5. But he took the $5 and he laughed and he did headshots. And that was one of my favorite stories of Bill, because Bill could calm these guys down. I had the Road Warriors hot at me because I was doing portraits of them. And Hawk wanted to stick out his tongue. I said, no, don't do the tongue. This is a formal portrait. He goes, "Well, I always do the tongue. What are you telling me? Don't do my gimmick." I said, "But I want my picture to be not like everybody else's. I want it to be special." So he told Bill, "Don't send that guy down here anymore. We don't like him. But then Bill sent me back, and I saw Hawk, and I talked to him, and I apologized, and I said, "Look, I'm just trying to make my pictures look different than other pictures. You do the tongue all the time, so I wanted to show you a different side." He understood that, but I tell you what, Hawk, let's do another picture now, and let's do your tongue. And he took a real scary picture with his tongue. And on the next issue was the Halloween issue, and they did a big picture of Hawk with the tongue, and
Oh
he
yeah,
forgave me. And you asked me about my favorite covers. Another favorite cover, there was one or two of them. One Craig Peters came up with, where he took a picture of Kamala, and they put Hulk Hogan's bloody face on like a stick, like
that's right.
Hulk, like Kamala was hunting for Hulk. And that got that raised a lot of eyebrows. That wasn't done too often, like that kind of stuff,
I remember that.
and that raised eyebrows. Another great cover that I'm proud of, that I don't have a copy of, that I'd like to get, and I looked on eBay for it. Mike Tyson. He fought Buster Douglas. I don't know if you remember this. Buster Douglas was a big, heavy-set kid,
Yeah,
and Japan really, really wanted Mike Tyson to come to Japan. So Mike Tyson's manager said, "We'll send Mike to Japan, and he'll do like an exhibition fight." So they set up a fight with this with an unknown fighter, a heavy set kid from Brooklyn, New York, named Buster Douglas. Buster Douglas's mother passed away about a month before the fight. The promoters said to Buster Douglas, "Look, we understand you're in a bad position. We'll be more than happy to postpone the fight." And Buster Douglas got mad and said, "My mother did not raise a quitter. I am going into this fight, and I'm winning." And, Mike Tyson said, "All right, great. I hope the kid does well. The Brooklyn boy like me. We'll give him a chance to make some money." And Mike went to Japan, and he was partying, hanging out, having a great time. Buster Douglas didn't stop training 24/7. He got in the ring with Mike Tyson and put him on his behind. It was a great thing. The
wow,
kid really was sincere. He had his mother's behind him, and he went in there and knocked Mike out.
he was determined.
And then Mike beat him again a couple of months later in a rematch, but we needed a cover shot. And at the time, Nintendo was really popular, the original Nintendo,
Yeah,
and they had Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, which, by the way, Mike autographed for me.
no way.
I have the Mike Tyson Punch-Out game, and it says, "To Roy, Mike Tyson."
Wow, that's
So I
great.
said to Craig Peters, I said, "Let's photograph." I said, "They have a code now." And this was before the internet. I said, "There's little fan books and fan clubs where you can get a code, and when you play Punch Out, you go right to Mike Tyson. You don't have to go through the other fighters. You can go right to the end if you
Yeah,
have the code." So we got the code, and we were playing Punch. I brought Nintendo to the office, and we had Mike Tyson on the screen. So we brought Buster Douglas in, and we had him holding the Nintendo controller with the Nintendo game on the TV, with Mike Tyson like down on the Nintendo game.
yeah.
And it was a great cover. And I wish I could have had that one. I don't have it. And then I showed you this cover yesterday, was my favorite, which I'm
Oh,
not even sure who photographed this. Trying to get the glare.
that's a
The
great shot.
Destroyer.
Dick Byer.
Um, and when I was a kid growing up, we asked a lot of questions about Dick Byer and the Sheik, because Dick Byer was not allowed in New York because he wore a mask, and the Sheik was banned. So those are the two guys that never, and Dick the Bruiser, the three wrestlers that were always in the magazines that never came to New York. But in the one of the magazines, the Destroyer was selling his masks. So when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I bought myself the Destroyer mask. I bought myself a Destroyer mask,
Oh, that's
and I still
fantastic.
have it. But when I was sent to the Cauliflower Alley Club to photograph the event, I brought the mask. And when I met the Destroyer, I told him I was a big fan and had the mask in all these years. And he loved it. And he insisted that I take a picture with him. So I put the mask on, and
Wow,
I got to meet the Destroyer. And that was a thrill.
what a shot.
And that was a thrill.
Now,
But
you
what's
mentioned
great, I loved reading Brian Solomon's book about the Sheik, because we never knew anything about the Sheik. He never came to New York, and we always heard about him, but we always dying to see him. And I remember one time we were in New York, going to Madison Square Garden, And some of the fans were going, "Yeah, we're all going up to Boston this weekend because the Sheik is fighting Bruno in Boston, but
Yep.
they won't let him fight in New York." So a lot of guys were going up to Boston. And I think I told you we used to take the railroad to Madison Square Garden, hang out outside the garden to try and get pictures. And this was, what we call, I guess they call them smart fans now. But we were hip to all that, and we would go early and try and meet the wrestlers. And we used to see Bill there and bother him to sell pictures. And there were other guys that would sell pictures on the corner. And that's how we got into photographing them.
Yeah.
And then on the way home, there was a 10 minutes after 11 o'clock train that left Madison Square Garden to go to Long Island. And I found out later when I worked for the WWF that they had a union running the show, electrical unions and unions in Madison Square Garden that worked till 11 o'clock. And if they worked past 11 o'clock, they got paid overtime. So the promoters didn't want to pay overtime. So Madison Square Garden Wrestling ended at 11 o'clock. As soon as the digital clock at Madison Square Garden turned to 11, you heard ding, 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 and the show was over. And we'd race down Madison Square Garden to get the 11:10 train. We had 10 minutes to get to the train. We knew all the shortcuts. We got to the train, and we'd take the train ride home with John Arezzi, who
Oh, yeah.
later on did a wrestling show. Frank Amato was on the train going to Valley Stream, and we had our own little compartment of all the smart fans. We trade pictures and talk about wrestling, and we all used to try and get home by 12 o'clock because they had on the radio the Monday Night Wrestling show. And that was as close to you got as like a Wrestling Observer newsletter. That was the only thing that had like real smart fan information. And it was run by Happy Holiday and Professor Elliott, the Monday Night Wrestling show. We love you the most, to say the least. And it turns out Professor Elliott was a big deal later on with the World Wrestling Federation. He was Professor Elliott Murnick, who was good friends with Howard Finkel. And Elliott's job was to work Madison Square Garden and take the ring jackets back from the wrestlers after they were introduced so they wouldn't get stolen. And Elliott used to watch the gear from the guys who were in the ring. So I got to know Professor Elliott, and I used to ask him about the wrestling show on Monday nights. And then John Arezzi later on got to do his own wrestling show, which I used to love to listen to. And I still love listening to the podcasts, like the Brian Solomon podcast and the Jim Cornette podcast. And I'm a little upset with Jim Cornette because he was talking about the time Bill took him around Manhattan to photograph him at all the famous places. And it wasn't Bill. Again, Bill didn't want to go into the city. It was me. I took Jim Cornette all around and the Midnight Express to the NBC studios and the Empire State Building, and we had a great time. So I like still listening to the podcasts and talking about wrestling, but that started on the Monday Night Radio Wrestling show after
Wow.
Madison Square Garden. And I remember them talking about how Jack Briscoe won the title and Harley Race. And we didn't hear about any of that because, the Bill Apter magazines were always like 3 or 4 weeks later.
Now, how
And,
important do you think WrestleMania 1 was for the industry?
well, like everybody else, it's what brought wrestling and became, but made everybody else aware of wrestling. Wrestling, was a closet thing, and had little groups and UHF, and it's been well documented how WrestleMania really took off, and other people said it was really WrestleMania 3 because that's when they packed the suit
Silverdome.
the silver in Pontiac, Michigan, and
Yep.
people say, "Wow, look how many people are going to this event." So I think that really put them over. Plus the publicity of Andre the Giant, everybody knew Andre, so that really put over. And then the cable TV expansion, and
Any,
Vince McMahon was a sharp cookie. He knew what he was doing. He knew how to promote it. And
any personal memories of Howard Finkel, ring announcer?
no, not too many, but one thing I did get a kick out of. We were in the Nassau Coliseum, and Jake Roberts was in the main event, and Jake was at a really peak of popularity, and Jake didn't make the show. So his substitute was Hillbilly Jim. And I love the way that I even told him, I said, I love the way Howard Finkel um, explained this to the audience because he did it like, well, Jake can't make it tonight, and everybody was booing. But the way he plugged it up, he goes, but in his replacement, And he did it really slowly. He dragged it out. And from the bottom of his gut, Hillbilly Jim. And the place went crazy. Hillbilly Jim was like a preliminary wrestler,
Yeah.
that they used on TV to do angles to put over Hulk when guys would beat him up. But when Howard Finkel knew how to pronounce his name in such a way that the place went crazy. It was
All
just
about presentation,
Hillbilly
right?
Jim. So that part I remember about Howard Finkel. And Howard was kind of like people would say, well, Vince doesn't watch other wrestling, and Vince isn't interested in. He doesn't have the time. He's only interested in WWE. But Howard Finkel was the guy who read all the magazines and all the fan sheets and knew all the inside, knew all the
Yep.
dirt. But he acted like he didn't. But he knew. He was an encyclopedia of wrestling.
He
Too
really
bad he's
was.
not around. Too bad Howard's not around with all these podcasts.
I know.
And I know I get a kick out of the how it's Brian Last and Jim Cornette. And I'm interested in Brian Last because he's from Long Beach, where I was telling you about Helen Hart. And so I'd like to talk to him about Long Beach. And they're always arguing about pizza and what to put on burgers. And they were talking about side dishes. And I was trying to get a message through to Brian that everybody in New York knows that a side dish for pizza is salad. And Brian was saying, there's no side dish for pizza, but there is, and he should know better being a New York boy.
Right.
And all pizza families on Friday night have a big salad with pizza.
Yep.
He should know that. But I
Yep.
love the podcasts. I love listening to old stories about wrestling, telling my old stories about wrestling.
Well, it's funny you
In fact,
brought
if
up.
you give me,
Oh, go ahead.
no, ask me some questions. I'm doing all the talking. I'm
Yeah, well,
sorry.
you brought up the professor, Elliot Marin. He used to call me once a month, and he would ask me wrestling trivia every time he'd call. He'd always have a trivia question.
Okay.
And if you
How
got it
often were you
wrong,
correct?
uh, pretty good amount of the time. I mean, a lot of his questions were kind of stuff before my time, but
Oh, okay.
I was knowledgeable enough to where I did pretty well, and he was always impressed. And he was unique. He was a unique character.
Oh, for sure. No, he's a smart guy.
Really
Um,
was.
I think I told you yesterday. When I was a kid growing up in middle school, Ray Stevens was Pedro. We had the WWF figured out when we were kids because every month Pedro Morales was the champ, had a new opponent, and he wrestled him 2 times. He wrestled him 1 month in the Garden, and something would go wrong where it'd have to have a rematch the second month. And 2 weeks before the rematch, they were going to bring in the next competitor on television. There was a pattern, and we figured it out. So we knew 2 weeks before the second rematch they were going to bring the next opponent for Pedro on TV. So we had this all figured out. But for one period, they brought in Ray Stevens. And this was right between Moondog Mayne and King Curtis, who were always yelling and acting crazy. But Ray Stevens came on, and he was smooth. He had like a cool a track suit that they used to wear in the 70s, and sunglasses. And he wasn't yelling. He was very cool. So I said to my friends, from now on, don't call me Roy. I want to be Ray. And I started filling out all my papers, Ray London. And they called my mother. And my poor mom was so sad because she thought that I didn't like the name she gave me, or I didn't love her anymore and wanted to be somebody else. And I had to convince her, no, 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 no. I just love Ray Stevens. I want to be like Ray Stevens.
Yeah.
And she goes, all right, as long as I. And then I went back to being Roy. But when I went to work for the WWE one time, we were in, I think, Las Vegas for WrestleMania. And they asked me if I'd go to the airport to photograph the wrestlers coming off the planes for WrestleMania. They thought it'd make some great shots. And I did that. And we did get some good shots. And then I saw Ray Stevens coming off the plane. I photographed him. And then he asked me, do you have a car? I need to get to the arena. And I was going to rent a car. But I said, yeah, I'll drive you. You don't have to rent the car. So it was me and Ray Stevens walking through the airport. And I remember asking Ray if I could carry his bag, because I remember reading somewhere that the young wrestlers are supposed to carry the bags for the older wrestlers,
Yep.
especially like in Japan. The new wrestlers have to do things for the older wrestlers to break in. So I wanted to carry Ray Stevens' bag, and he looked at me like, "Why? I don't get it." But okay, if you insist. And then we would talk, and I said, "This is the coolest moment of my life, driving around Las Vegas with Ray Stevens. What could be better than this?" And today, I don't know if I've ever topped that, driving around with Ray Stevens. And I remember Ray became an agent, and we were doing a little local show in Fresno, California, and he had to count the money and add up the numbers, and he had trouble adding the numbers, and I felt bad for him, and he asked me to help him, and I helped him. And I never told anybody this because I didn't want anybody to think Ray Stevens wasn't a brilliant guy, but he had trouble with math. But boy, did we love Ray Stevens. And we also, Don Leo Jonathan. Remember Don Leo
Oh yeah,
Jonathan? He
Canadian,
was
right?
another guy. He was another guy that came in to fight Pedro, but he didn't scream and he didn't holler, and he was really cool and laid back. And my dad took me and my friend to see Pedro versus Don Leo Jonathan. And I was booing Pedro and I was cheering for Don Leo Jonathan. And somebody snuck up behind me and punched me really hard in the back. And I never saw who did it. But I realized then they weren't kidding. Madison Square Garden was a crazy, dangerous place.
Yeah,
You had to be careful who you were rooting for. It's not like today.
right.
Back then, if you booed Pedro, you were getting punched. And I
Sure.
did. And I was just a kid. And it was scary, in a way. But we loved Don Leo Jonathan. And and Jim Cornette loves to tell the story that he never saw anything like this until he got to the East Coast in Philadelphia, where the heels were more popular than the faces.
Right.
And that was when we were kids too. We got tired of Pedro, always doing the same routine on TV, complaining and whining. And even Lou Albano came on after Pedro talking Spanish and said, "I know what he was saying. He wants all the greasy, fat Puerto Ricans to come to Madison Square Garden because it's going to be Pedro's last match." And I couldn't believe that they let Lou Albano call the Puerto Ricans in New York greasy and fat. And you couldn't get away with that today, I don't
No.
think, but he did. And Lou Albano was one of the nicer guys too. I think I told you the Samoans.
Yep.
The Samoans were so nice. One time they saw me eating in the hotel restaurant, and they came over to me and said, "We don't let people eat by themselves. You have to come and sit with us. We don't let family eat by themselves." And I
Wow.
said, "I'm not by myself. I got a good book. I'm enjoying this." And they said, "No, you come sit with us. That's the way we do it." And they were serious. And and they were always good natured, friendly people, the Samoans.
Yeah.
So I got a real kick out of it when I was looking at Facebook, and somebody did a video of the youngest brother, Solo. Is that the young guy?
Yeah. Solo Sokoa.
Solo Sikoa. I think he's the younger brother of the Usos,
He is. You're
right?
correct. Yep.
Okay, so there's a video, it's a great video. He's on a plane, sitting on an aisle seat, snoozing, with his eyes closed, and an old lady walks by him and bunks into him and wakes him up by accident. So he shakes it up. He looks at her and he sees she's got his giant valise. So she has to put in the overhead. So he sees the valise and he says, "No, it's okay." And he picks up the valise for her and he smiles and he puts it in the compartment for her. And he picked it up like a feather. And you can see this woman wasn't big enough to pick up the valise, but he did it for her after she accidentally woke him up. And she thanked him. He said, "Oh, of course." And he went back to sleep. But those are the type of people they were. You couldn't bother them.
Yeah.
And he helped the lady put I said, "Yeah, those are and this was like when he was like the real bad guy with Roman Reigns, and I was surprised that they showed that. But it was a fan that did it, or I don't know.
They're
But
a
yeah,
very
the Samoans
respectable
were great.
family.
What a family.
Yeah.
And I think we saw Arthur once was getting on a plane in the middle of Madison, Wisconsin, in the dead of winter, and he was wearing 99-cent flip-flops. And I said, "Aren't your feet cold?" And I expected him to be macho and say, "No, I'm used to it." But he looked at me with a smile. He goes, "Oh, they're freezing." He goes, "I can't wait to get on the plane." So later, he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to other people. And I happened to be standing there. But he told people he can't buy shoes. His feet are just too big and too disformed.
Yeah.
And any shoes he buys has to be custom made. And he said, "The last time I bought a pair of shoes was for my daughter's wedding.
Oh
And I
wow.
haven't worn shoes since." And he had like nice outfit on, but you look down, he's wearing flip flops with these
Yeah.
big feet, like a real cowboy. And I always wanted to get a pair of cowboy boots. And growing up in New York City, they had one store that sold cowboy boots, Tony Lama's. And you had to have a really slender, skinny foot to buy these cowboy boots, and I could never fit. So when I got into wrestling and I was backstage, I saw these guys with these beautiful cowboy boots. I said, "Where do you get these boots? Look how big they are! Wow!" And he goes, "Well, next time we're in Justin, Texas, you'll go through. We'll show you where Justin boots are." And we went to Justin, Texas. It was outside of Dallas, I think. And this was a big warehouse, and they even had a beautiful catalog, and all the boots were made there. And these were boots for cowboys, not for city slickers.
Right.
These boots. So when I told them my size, they laughed. They said, "Ah, we usually don't have stuff that small here. These are for cowboys, but we'll find a pair for you." And I still have the boots. I love them.
Oh, wow.
And I got them in Justin, Texas, made in the USA. Roper boots, and when I wear them, and even now the kids in school would get on my nerves, and I look at the kids and say, "You know what? I got shoes in my closet older than you. You better go sit down." And so yeah, and then I think of those Justin boots, and that's a great story. See, Dusty Rhodes, he had a big foot. But he always had like $10,000 cowboy boots, like made of ostrich or some
Right.
crazy animal. And
Yeah.
I think I asked him, I said, "Where'd you get those boots? Those are so cool." I said, and they would look like they'd fit. And so that's one of my favorite stories.
That's great. How about
I,
referee?
I know when we're done with this, that I'm going to think of a dozen other stories that I wish I told you.
Oh,
So we
we'll have
might
you
have to
back
do this
anytime.
again. Yeah.
Referee Tim White, longtime employee. What are
Oh
your
yeah.
memories of Tim and the friendly tap?
Yeah, I brought that up because I met Tim, and Tim was so funny. Tim would love to sit like in the hotel lounges or the lobbies, and just he wouldn't go to his room. He'd just sit in the lobby, and anybody would come up, he'd love to talk. And he had an interesting job with WWE. I don't know if anybody ever brought this up, but he was a referee. But then they gave him the exclusive job of driving around Andre the Giant because Andre didn't want to go on planes that much. If he could avoid a plane, he would. So they bought this giant van and they made like a custom seat for Andre in the back. And Tim's job was to drive him from town to town instead of taking planes. And Tim had some funny stories. Tim can make you laugh so hard your stomach would hurt. And I don't want to go into some of the stories now, but he would tell great stories about Andre sitting in the back of the van and just drinking. And one thing he would tell me that if they were late, the van would speed on the highways and they'd get pulled over. And then the police officers would look in the van and see Andre the Giant sitting there. And they always traveled with boxes of souvenirs. And even Tom Buchanan used to suggest if you ever get pulled over, make sure the back seat is filled with souvenirs. And they give them to you so you can give them away. And they would give the police officer who stopped the van all the souvenirs and T-shirts. And Andre had liquor in the car. You weren't allowed to drive around with open liquor, but Andre had liquor. And police would say, "All right, listen, what I'm going to do is I have another guy about 5 miles up the road. I'll put him on the radio now and let him know you're coming so he won't bother you." Because
Right.
otherwise you go that fast, they're going to pull you over.
Oh, yeah.
So they would get on the radio and say, "We got Andre the Giant coming in a white van. Leave him alone." And Tim would say they'd speed 90 miles an hour. Nobody would bother them. And if they got pulled, he said once in a while they'd get pulled over and there'd be some officer who didn't care about Andre the Giant, had no interest in wrestling, and gave them away a ticket. They got a lot of tickets, but they avoided a bunch.
Yeah.
And Tim White was great. I was very sad when I heard about his passing.
Yeah. Great guy. He really was. Family guy. And
Oh, he was funny. Tell the stories he could tell.
yeah. Yeah. Great brothers. It was just a great family.
Yeah, I remember one story he said he was in a hotel with a bunch of the wrestlers, and the golf pros were touring and came through, and they made friends with the wrestlers. And they're saying, "Tim, you guys play golf, don't you?" And Tim was like, "Oh yeah, well, we love golf." And they're going, "Well, come out to the course tomorrow. We have the whole course. Well, we'd love to play you guys. We would love for you to be our guest." And Tim White saying, "We never played golf a day in our lives. What did I get us into?" And Tim said they were out and they were hitting the golf balls. And they said one guy hit the ball so hard it flew over the fence and hit a car on the road or something. And The guys were saying, well, "You told us you guys played golf. You guys never played golf, have you?" The way I can never repeat it the way Tim told it, but
Yeah.
Tim was so funny saying how he was shooting the ball and he almost broke a window with the PGA guys or the
Yeah.
LPGA, whatever it was.
Now, who
Yeah, I
would
don't
you
even remember half the stories, but Tim was great.
who would you say
When
is
you
the
got
greatest?
on the road and you went to a hotel, you weren't comfortable till you saw Tim sitting in the lobby drinking a beer, So you'd run up to your room, put your stuff away, and come down, sit with Tim.
Yeah. Oh, who would you say was the greatest attraction of all time?
For wrestling?
Yeah, if you had to choose one.
Well, it's funny because everybody knows Hulk Drew, and I remember the Ultimate Warrior was big during my spell. But I remember as a kid, they would bring in wrestlers from other territories. And for me, that was a big thrill. Like we'd watch the wrestling from California and see John Tolis and Victor Rivera. And next month in the Garden, they would bring them in. Or they'd bring in the wrestlers from the championship wrestling from Florida, the Funks and the Briscoes. And while that might not have been a big draw overall, for me, it was a big draw.
Yeah.
But you gotta give Hulk credit for all that. And then in the southern cities, Flair was a big draw. But as I think we learned, and as they're doing now, it's not just one wrestler anymore. It's the whole company. In fact, one of my questions for you, I'd like to know, and I've been trying to ask on podcasts, when wrestling shows come into the towns, whether it's a TV taping or a house show, do they still sell programs?
They do.
Because do they?
Yeah, they're available. They used to be, a small, glossy program.
But is it more like a magazine, or do they actually list the matches?
No,
Because when they promote the shows on TV, you don't hear them say, "Well, coming to Philadelphia, and Roman Reigns is going to fight John Cena," and in the tag match, they don't tell you who's wrestling. They just say Philadelphia, all the superstars are going to be there, but
yeah.
they don't tell you the specific matchups.
And the way it was when I was a kid, it would be, a program was a thin, basically a magazine, but it was specific, for that event, and it had
Right.
a paper in the middle with tonight's lineup. But nowadays, it's a big, oversized, glossy program that they'll just take on tour with them, and there's no more paper in the middle. You don't know what the matches are.
Right. They don't list the matches.
Yeah, it's just
That
generic.
that was a big deal. In Madison Square Garden, the program was only one piece of paper folded in half.
Right.
And I think it was by Norman Kreitzer. I learned later. But man, if you didn't get to the Garden, you had to beg and find somebody who was going just to pick you up the program. I still got all the programs. That was a big deal. So I was always wondering if they did away with that.
They did, unfortunately, that format anyway.
Because back in the day, there was no souvenirs, there was no T-shirts. The only thing they sold at wrestling was the program.
Yeah.
So you had to have the program.
Yeah, as a kid, that's what I wanted the most. Even when they did have the T-shirts, I had to have the program.
Yeah.
I was a big magazine collector as a kid. Inside Wrestling, PWI, New Wave Wrestling, of course, WWF magazine, Bill Apter's other project with Wow magazine.
Yeah, I
I
remember
used,
that.
I used to get all of those, and
There was even British magazines, and there was a British photographer that used to come to the United States and hang out with us, and he became friendly with me, and he used to ask me, to try and work out that I could sell him my pictures. And I said, well, you got to go through Bill with that, but we could work that out. They'll lend you pictures, and they were swapping pictures back and forth. And the guy took a liking to me, and he knew I was a very big dart player. So for helping him out, he sent me a real beautiful British dartboard that the British dart players played with,
oh wow,
and then he sent me VHS tapes of dart championships from England. And oh boy, those were beautiful to watch.
hmm.
And he was a nice guy. I remember his name was Colin Bowman. And he said, Roy, these tapes are under a different system in England. So if I tape it for you, I have to get them re-recorded in a different system so you could play them in America. Because if I just send you them from my TV, you won't be able to play them. So he used to have to get them converted. It probably wasn't cheap, but he did that for us. He
Yeah,
was a good guy. Bill used to get people to tape wrestling shows for him and mail it to us. And in Atlanta, they had a wrestling show that used to run all night. and one guy used to play tapes of all the promotions from all over the country in like a 5 or 6 hour block. And Bill had this lady tape them for us. So the tapes used to come in, and we used to like to take them home for the weekend and watch wrestling all weekend. And Bill promised this lady he'd give her like $5 or $10 a week to tape it. And then like a year later, the lady says, "Bill, I'm happy to tape these for you, but it's like $3 or $4 for me to mail it, plus buying the tapes. I'd appreciate it if you pay me back at least for the tapes. I'm not even asking for the $10 you promised me you would pay me. Just pay me for the postage and the tapes." So Bill goes, "Oh shit, I forgot to pay this woman." So he figured out how much it was that he owed her. And he went to tell Mr. Weston that he needs a check for $200. And Mr. Weston goes, "What? $200? What are you doing? You're taping the wrestling? We could tape that here. What are you doing?" Because Mr. Weston, he was frugal. He watched every nickel.
Yeah.
And if Bill went to him and said we had to pay the lady $20 for taping, he wouldn't have cared. But Bill forgot, and the lady was super nice and didn't ask for anything. And then, like 20 weeks later, she goes, "Oh, by the way, Bill, you did promise me $10 a week, so you owe me $200." So when Bill had to go ask I think Bill was afraid of Mr. Weston a little. He didn't want to ask him, but he gave Bill the money, and we paid him off. But that was funny. We got to tape him. Mr. Weston always liked me. He came to my wedding, and I wasn't afraid to talk to Mr. Weston. Mr. Weston was a painter, and he had these really wild abstract paintings in the hallway of the office building. And one day he came in late and he saw me looking at the pictures, and he's like, "Why aren't you at work? Why are you standing out here looking at these pictures? You should be by the desk working." That's how Mr. Weston was. I said, "Oh, but I loved how this is very obviously influenced by Salvador Dali. I'm very impressed by this picture. I love it the most. It's my favorite." And he took his pipe out and I go, "Oh, really? Really?" And he was impressed that I knew painters and knew about painting. And he liked to talk to me. Mr. Weston and I actually became very good friends and stayed friends even after he sold the publishing company. And I did some photography for him at his house. And when I became a school teacher, Mr. Weston wrote me a beautiful reference letter. And I said, "Mr. Weston, I think you're thinking of Stu Sachs or somebody. Are you sure you got the right guy?" And he goes, "You deserved it." And he helped me out.
Oh, wow, that's nice.
But then he reminded me, don't give out any wrestling magazines. They don't belong to you.
Yeah. Now, during your time in
Mr. Weston was a wonderful man. I really liked Mr. Weston. Stanley Weston.
Stanley Weston, yep.
In fact, I was looking through eBay a couple of weeks ago, or months ago, and somebody was selling a boxing magazine with a picture of Rocky Marciano, and you could see Stanley Weston written in the corner. So I had to buy it. And a lot of people don't know that. Mr. Weston, besides doing the wild abstracts that he was doing, he was a very good painter. He could reproduce any photograph. And he used to do the covers of Ring magazine with classic boxing pictures. So one time when I did the Mike Tyson picture that I showed you, Leroy Neiman, the famous painter, was walking around. And he came over to say hello to one of the boxing guys. And I introduced myself and told him what a big admirer I was of his artwork. And he was a sweet man, nice man, Leroy Neiman. And I took a picture next to him. And Mr. Weston saw the picture and he got mad. He said, "God damn it, I don't want Roy pestering Neiman. Make sure that Roy doesn't bother these people." I said, "Well, Mr. Weston, he liked me." He goes, "You're not there to meet him. You're there to take pictures. Don't bother people." So I had to learn that as a professional, you're not supposed to like fan up to the
Yeah.
celebrities. You're supposed to be proper and respectable. And I said, "Ah, come on, Mr. Weston. I'd love to meet Leroy." And I have a picture of him that I show the kids, Leroy Neiman. He was a nice man. He came to the office once and he really fast painted a picture of Sting.
Oh.
And me and Craig looked at each other and said, we could get this down to the copy machine across the street and make a few copies. And that's when they just came out with color Xerox.
Yep.
So me and Craig have a copy of the Sting picture. And I'm not sure where mine is. I know I have it in the file somewhere. But we gave Sting an original Leroy Neiman picture of
Wow.
himself. And Sting said, "Oh, I know Leroy Neiman. I'm going to cherish this."
That's great.
And I'll show you. I have a copy of the picture of Leroy painting it. He was a friend of Mr. Weston's.
Would love to
Mr.
see that.
Weston knew some very important people, but there's a famous story that I should tell you now because
Yeah.
Brian just came out with the Gorilla Monsoon book.
Yep.
Oh, we loved Gorilla Monsoon. What a guy, even when he was just on TV. But Mr. Weston took pictures or had somebody take pictures of Gorilla Monsoon at his home outside of Philadelphia in New Jersey in the late 60s when he was wrestling Bruno Sammartino. And Gorilla Monsoon had a beautiful, expensive antique rifle collection. And they took pictures of the rifle collection. And Gorilla, yeah, these are beautiful rifles. I'd love for you to take a picture of them. And then they printed in the magazine a picture of the rifle collection with a caption that Gorilla's got rifles, and something like, well, he better not see Bruno or find Bruno, like he was going to shoot Bruno. And Gorilla Monsoon's family got very upset over that, and Bruno's family got upset, and Gorilla got upset. And I think it took Bill quite a while to get back on Gorilla Monsoon's good side. And yeah, I don't think Gorilla ever forgave Mr. Weston for that.
Hmm.
Because he let him come to the house and do the pictures, but they say he was pointing at guns, and he said, "I'm going to shoot Bruno," and or something like that. And they took that very seriously and very hard, and said that wasn't a nice caption to write.
Right.
And I love, I can't wait to read the Brian Solomon book on Gorilla Monsoon. Boy, he
Ryan's a
was such
great guy, and
a
he's
dumb
very
guy.
knowledgeable.
And when I was a kid growing up, I have an older sister, and one of her friends who was older than her used to see me watching wrestling, and he would come and talk to me. And he was about 10 years older than me, so he would tell me, "Oh, Roy, back in the '60s, Gorilla Monsoon used to be one of Bruno's biggest enemies, and he didn't look like he looks now. He had a beard, and he was a scary looking guy." And he gave me a magazine. I still have it of the gorilla facing Bruno. So he was telling me, and he said he saw the Sheik in Madison Square Garden, and the Sheik was throwing chairs. That was one of the Sheik's gimmicks. And the State Athletic Commission in Madison Square Garden didn't like that because fans started throwing the chairs back. And
Oh,
that was the last time they brought the Sheik in. But this older guy, his name was Harvey. Harvey knew all that and saw all that. So we loved talking to Harvey because he remembered Bruno's first run. We never saw Bruno's first run that ended in 71 because
okay.
we were too young. But that's when we became fans in 72 when Pedro took over. And we didn't like Pedro. We were rooting against Pedro. He almost got beat up for it.
Oh, yeah.
But it started shifting. It started shifting, especially when Bruno came back. And everybody loved Bruno. You couldn't boo against Bruno.
Yeah.
But one thing I saw Gorilla Monsoon do that I never saw, and I told Brian Solomon, I hope he mentioned this in his book, that Gorilla Monsoon used to be the fall guy for Pedro and Bruno. In other words, they'd bring in a guy, like I told you, 2 weeks before the last TV taping, the new guy would come in, and sometimes he'd face Gorilla Monsoon, and he'd do something really dirty and hurt Gorilla Monsoon, and then Pedro or Bruno would want to get back for their friend Gorilla. So sometimes Gorilla would come in and do jobs for the guys that are trying to get over to face Bruno or Pedro.
Sure.
So they brought in, and this was great because this was the first time I ever heard anybody talk about this. We knew that the Grand Wizard, and the Grand Wizard's one of the only guys they never made a real action figure from. And he was one of my favorite guys. Give me 1 second. I want to get something to show you. I'll be right
Sure.
back.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a lady in my neighborhood when we were kids growing up who used to make paper mache action figures of athletes for table ornaments for weddings and mostly bar mitzvahs, because it was a boy's bar mitzvah. They'd have centerpieces on the tables with all the famous athletes. And the lady used to charge people to do it. So I begged my mother to have these centerpieces made for my bar mitzvah. And we contacted the lady, and she said, "I'm already booked. I need at least 6 months' notice. I can't do this for you. It's only, my mother told her like 2 weeks ahead of time." She goes, "But they were friends of ours." I said, "But I'm going to make a special action figure for Roy. I can't do the whole party. I'm going to make one for Roy for his bar mitzvah." And I still have part of it. Part of it got destroyed. It's in a little
Oh,
bag.
wow.
This was the Grand Wizard of Wrestling.
That's fantastic.
And it had Don Leo Jonathan with him. It was a pair. And you see the little, in the wizard's headdress, he's got the little star
Oh, yeah.
that the wizard used to wear. The wizard was great. Nobody could talk like the Grand Wizard of Wrestling. Not Jim Cornette, not Bobby Heenan, and they were great. Not Paul Heyman. The Grand Wizard really could ad lib like nobody. And we knew that Abdullah Farouk was his name when he managed the Sheik, but it was explained to us that his name is Abdullah Farouk, but he is the Grand Wizard, so he could have two names. But when they brought in Nikolai Volkov, and Nikolai Volkov used to come on TV with Fred Blassie and squeeze an apple. And we used to try it. It's not easy to squeeze an apple.
Yeah.
But Nikolai Volkov used to put the apple in his hand and not dig his fingers in, but just have his hand and squeeze it. And he would squeeze the apple. So what they did was they had a match with Nikolai Volkov against Gorilla Monsoon. And when he beat up Gorilla Monsoon bad, then Bruno came back to get his revenge. But Nikolai Volkov was beating up Gorilla Monsoon, and Gorilla Monsoon took his boot off. He unlaced his wrestling boot and beat up Nikolai Volkov with his wrestling boot. That was the one and only time I ever saw a wrestler take his boot off and use it as a weapon. And that was Gorilla Monsoon.
Wow.
But this was interesting for me as a kid because they were talking about Nikolai Volkov being another wrestler. And I was like, and we didn't know what they meant. They said, yeah, he was Beppo Mongol. In the early 70s, there was a tag team, the Mongols, Beppo and Guido, and he was one of the Mongols. So we had no idea as kids that wrestlers could be one guy one year and then go to another city and shave his head or something and be a new guy.
Right.
We didn't know that. In fact, one of the fathers told us that the reason wrestlers wear masks is because if they don't have enough guys to wrestle that night, a guy will wear a mask and wrestle Bruno and then come out without the mask and wrestle another guy.
Yeah.
And when I asked later on about why Mil Mascaras was allowed to wear a mask, but El Olympico and some of the other preliminary wrestlers had to wear a mask with their face showing, it was because the State Athletic Commission was finding out that wrestlers were wrestling twice on the card, getting paid twice, but only paying the state commission or the taxes once. Because they were wearing a mask. It had something to do with that, not because it was. We used to think, they thought they were gangsters or something with masks. We didn't know why they weren't allowed, but we learned later on it's because they were getting double paid or something like that.
Sure.
But that was crazy. Now wrestlers, they come back with different names all the time. Bryan Danielson is Daniel Bryanson or something.
Yep.
But back then, when we found out that Nikolai Volkov was a different guy, we were crazy.
And you have Bill Eadie. He was, of course, Super Machine.
Superstar. But that was later on. This was in the early 70s. And also later on, the second time I think we realized that was, and we were 11, 12 years old, and we were figuring wrestling out, knowing when new guys were going to come in the territory. And we knew, if one guy was wrestling Gorilla Monsoon or Tony Gurria or Manuel Soto, we knew they were going to lose. So the next week, Pedro would get his revenge. And we had it all figured out. I was going to tell you something. I lost my train of thought. But okay. Oh, yeah. Years later, Big John Studd came in. Remember Big John Studd?
Yeah.
10 years ago, 15 years ago, when he was much younger, he was Chuck Connors.
Right.
And a protege of Killer Kowalski. Because Killer Kowalski came out wearing a mask.
Yep.
And we knew it was Killer Kowalski because you couldn't hide his body.
Yeah.
And his long arms and everything. But Killer Kowalski would come on interviews and say, yeah, I'm wearing a mask, but I'm still Killer Kowalski. And he used to pretend to put a piece of metal in the mask and hit the guy in the head. But he used to wrestle with Chuck O'Connor. So years later, when Big John Studd came out, I think we recognized him. We said, wait a second. That guy used to wrestle here years ago. He was Chuck O'Connor or Chuck Connors. The Chuck Connors was the TV guy. This was Chuck O'Connor. Yeah, you could look that up.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting in professional wrestling that took us by surprise when we learned how guys changed their names and their gimmicks.
Right.
And then we were also impressed the first time we saw a wrestler do what do they call it today? When he changes, when he turns, is that what they call it?
Oh, like a heel turn or a baby face.
Right. The first time when we saw John Tolis become a nice guy and want to be friends with Victor Rivera, we were like, what? Is that real? Can they do that? He's a nice, we were surprised. We never saw turns like that. And then John Tolis turned on him again and shaved his head and became a maniac.
Yep.
John Tolis was one of my favorite guys. I couldn't wait to meet John Tolis when he came to New York. And John Tolis wrestled as a manager. You like this story. They came up with an independent wrestling league one year where it's very similar to AEW, where they had this young guy who had a ton of money who just wanted to be a wrestling promoter. So he started his own promotion and he brought all these big names into a hotel in New York City. And John Tolis was one of them. And I couldn't wait to meet him. And then we found out, I don't know how I heard about this, maybe through the Dave Meltzer Wrestling Observer newsletters, that the guy who had all the money promised the wrestlers he'd pay him, and he never paid him. And he was hiding somewhere. So they did like 3 tapings, and guys were owed thousands of dollars, and the guy disappeared, and then they found him dead in a hotel one day of a drug overdose or something.
Oh my gosh.
And I forgot the guy's name, but if I heard it, I would tell you. But they brought all these big names to start a new promotion. I think even Bruno was there, and he might have been the announcer. And they brought in a guy named Steve Williams, Dr. Death, from
Yeah.
the Bill Watts promotion. I met Steve. Remember Steve Williams, Dr. Death?
Absolutely.
He
Yeah.
was he was a big, huge man.
Yep.
And they sent me down there to meet him and take pictures when he won a championship. And he was a really sweet, nice guy. I really liked him. So I was excited he was coming back to New York. And they brought him. And I wish I could remember the guy's name. It was a crazy story, but he started this wrestling promotion. It was supposed to be real big, but the guy ran out of money or something. And then there was a story where he took a bunch of the wrestlers to a famous restaurant, and he had escorts come, beautiful women, and they were ordering the most expensive bottles of champagne, and he was trying to impress these wrestlers, and he insisted on paying for the bill. So he paid the bill, and then he said, listen, I got to run to the bathroom. He went to the bathroom, and they had payphones, and he picked up the payphone, and he called the credit card company and said, listen, I just got out of my business, and I reached down, and I realized my wallet's gone, and all my credit cards are gone. You're going to have to cancel my credit cards. So he took these people out and spent thousands of dollars, and then he went and he charged it, and then a few hours later, stuff like that was going on.
Wow.
You don't remember this?
Was that the UWF?
UWF was with Bill Watts, like in Houston and Louisiana.
Okay.
That was earlier. This was like the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
They had a hotel. Abrams. Herbert Abrams. Was there a Herb Abrams?
Herb Abrams.
Yeah, I think that was the name. This crazy little guy. He's apparently had a very wealthy family. He wanted to buy himself into the wrestling business. He hired all these guys. He didn't pay him. They wanted to kill him. And they found him dead in a hotel one night. But why did I bring this up? I forgot. Oh, because I think he was bringing in wrestlers from all over the country. No, we're talking about changing their names. How interesting that was as a young wrestling fan to learn that. Because, you never saw baseball players change their names.
Right.
You never saw Willie Mays show up in a new uniform under a different name. So when the wrestlers show up, with a different outfit. But that wasn't done too much like it's done now.
And John Tolos, he had a very short stint when he came back as Mr. Perfect's manager.
That's what it was. He came back as a manager.
He was
Herb
coach.
Abrams. And then they brought him into Kurt Angle. No, not Kurt Angle, Kurt Hennig.
Kurt Hennig, yeah, his name was Coach.
They got into a fight. I remember reading this in the Observer newsletter that they got a fight. And John Tolos pulled out a knife. And said, I might be older than you guys, but I ain't, I don't take any shit from any of you guys. Yeah, that sounds like the John Tolos I remember.
Yeah.
And then he was gone. But John Tolos wasn't a big muscular guy. He was a regular, slender built, but he knew how to, those guys knew how to talk.
Yep.
That was the best part of a wrestling show in those days, the interview segments.
Yeah.
That was, you couldn't, it was always in the middle of the WWF too.
And your time in the WWF, you had two of your photos that were made into promotional photos. So you had a P series promo photo of Yokozuna, which was an 8x10 black and white. And you also had the 11x14 of WrestleMania 9, the crowd shot, Caesar's Palace.
Where it climbed up to the last row of the...
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, no, that was a great shot. I also they did a poster of Bret Hart
okay.
that I did in one of his fan magazines, and I had that hung up in my classroom for a long time. And they did a centerfold of Lex Luger posed in front of the Washington Monument. You didn't have to hang out. You can come in. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all
Yeah,
right.
they we did Lex. So I had some nice pictures in my magazine that I'm proud of.
Yeah. And do you still keep most of that? You've got most of it?
I have all of it.
All of it.
My garage is like a warehouse, and my family accuses me daily of being a hoarder. But I told them, I'm not a hoarder. I'm a collector. There's a difference.
Right. Right.
And I still have the magazine. I have my magazines from the 70s when I was a kid, and most of them are missing the covers. But I have those. I told you I have an extensive photo collection that I bought pictures from Frank Amato.
Oh, yes.
And he made me promise that I would never sell them or reproduce them, and I never did.
Hmm.
And I still have that collection.
Wow.
When Frank Amato used to sell me pictures, I was 12 or 13. In fact, Frank Amato, when he found out I had a dark room, he once gave me some black and white film to develop, and I messed it up, and I ruined the film, and he was very upset with me. And I never forgave myself, and I always wanted to hope I'd run into Frank Amato at the matches and apologize and tell him how sorry I was, and if I could ever make it up to him. And then I was on vacation one day, and Bill says when I came back, "Hey, you know who's here? Frank Amato's daughter. She wanted a job, but for some reason he didn't give him a job." And I was very mad at Bill. That was the only time I ever got mad at Bill. I said, "Oh, you should have given Frank a job. I owe Frank a favor. I ruined his film when I was about 12 years old. So you should have given his daughter a favor. If I was here, you would have hired her."
Yeah.
And so I owe a lot of my beginning to Frank Amato. If he's around, I'd like to send him my best. And remember George Napolitano? He was a famous photographer that was on the same level as Bill. And one day they had on television, The Rock was at a movie premiere walking down the red carpet, and he spotted George Napolitano working as a paparazzi, taking pictures from the red behind the line of the red carpet. And The Rock spots him. He goes, "George Napolitano, oh my goodness!" And he brought him onto the red carpet, and he introduced him and said, "Do you know George Napolitano took pictures of my father and my grandfather when I was just a kid, and he got them in magazines and got them publicity." And then The Rock told his assistant, "I want you to go to the limousine and bring a bottle of champagne and two glasses." And he made George Napolitano drink some champagne. This was a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I like The Rock. I never met The Rock. I'd like to meet The Rock.
Yeah. He seems like a genuine person.
But in my classroom, I had a picture up of The Rock with the line that said, "Know your role."
Oh, yeah.
And I used to tell my students, know your role. Know who you are, what you're supposed to do, and do it well.
Right. Right.
So I got that.
Now, if you had to put together a Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling, who would you say are the top four of all time? Any promotion, any territory?
The wrestlers or the
Yeah, the
back?
wrestlers.
Well, I guess everybody had. You look at it from 2 points of view.
Yeah.
Who are the people that you enjoyed watching perform? Who are the people you like working with professionally? And who are the people that really just deserved it because they put wrestling on the map?
Right.
Like Hulk Hogan. Put wrestling on the map. You might not have been a big fan, but you can't deny what he did.
Exactly.
And somebody like Bruno Sammartino, who ran a territory, and Vince McMahon, who made it. Those are the big names. But Chief Jay Strongbow once told me there was only 2 or 3 superstars of professional wrestling, and that was Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, and Gorgeous George, because those were the only 3 wrestling performers that were ever featured on mainstream news or mainstream media. Hulk Hogan was on the Sports Illustrated cover, which I have, which was once, I don't think they've ever duplicated a professional wrestler on Sports Illustrated. So he deserves a lot of credit for that. Um, But I have my favorites: John Tolis and Cactus Jack. And today, I love this Maxwell Jacob Friedman,
Oh yeah,
the
MJF.
Jewish wrestler from Long Island.
Yep,
He had his bar mitzvah in the ring on television.
that's right.
I love that. Jacob. And then I was impressed with this Darby Allen.
Yeah,
I like him, and these are small, but they're getting stale on that show. They got to do something with that show. The guys are getting stale.
Darby's
There's
a
not
risk
enough new
taker.
talent coming in or different talent. The AEW could make it, but those everything that's been said about them has been well documented.
Yeah.
But I still enjoy that. Is there anything else you could think of that I might?
Well, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to be remembered for?
Um, I'm proud of the fact that I have worked with young children that can draw a little bit, and I've instilled in them the love of art, and I've instilled in them that nothing happens without practice and a hard work ethic. And now I have children that far surpass me in abilities and art, and I'm very proud of. A little bit more than my photography and wrestling. That was a part of my life that passed me, and I'm very proud of that. But I think I'm more proud of the accomplishments I did as a school teacher and the lives that I've affected, without even realizing it. You think you're just going to work, and you think you're just working with children all day, and you come home and it's over, but you don't realize the impression you make and how the kids look up to you and they emulate you. And so, knowing that, I always try to emulate other people that I want, like Mr. Rogers or somebody like Bruno Sammartino, who was always very polite and always a gentleman. And that passed over into my school teaching. So I think wrestling had an influence on my school teaching, and then my school teaching had an influence on me. And without realizing it, I made a good impression on a lot of young people that I think will become successful and have already become successful in their own lives. And I think that's a nice thing that I could look back on.
And
And of course, I loved about the wrestling was traveling and meeting people. And when I left wrestling, just to have somebody like yourself, Joe, look me up and knew that I at one time was interested in this. I think you looked me up because you found my name and you wanted to see if I had any pictures to sell or something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that. And I
always.
always promised you when I get through the garage, if I find anything that's in doubles, I'll send them to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always been an avid collector of promo photos and the lanyards. You know, the backstage passes
Oh
and
yeah, sure.
just I don't
But
know.
be careful, Joe. You're gonna reach my age one day, and you're gonna ask yourself, "What am I gonna do with this stuff?" That's the scary part now. I have a garage full of collectibles, and and these could be expensive and good quality things.
Yeah.
But if there's nobody in your family that shares that passion, like I'm afraid all my valuable baseball cards and comic books are going to end up in Goodwill. Because
No.
my wife and daughter don't have any interest or even the patience to try and investigate what it's worth. I have a collection of 1960s action figures, like Captain Action and GI Joe.
Oh
It
yeah.
was very popular when I was a kid. I still have them, and I started collecting them again. Buying with eBay is wonderful. With eBay, you can buy all the stuff you lost as a kid.
Right. Exactly.
So I have all that stuff. But be careful, Joe, because one day you're going to ask yourself, "What?" At least I think your boys like the wrestling.
They do. Well, two of them do. Yeah. The other one, my son
So
Chase.
they might want to take over your collection one day, but my daughter has no interest in this.
Yeah.
I don't even think she would have the patience if I told her sell the magazines, you'll make enough money to go on a wonderful vacation. I don't think she would even care. So I'm looking for another someone to go in my will. That would be maybe you, Joe. Want to come over and pick up all this stuff before my wife throws it away?
Sign me up, but let's make sure that's a long time from now, right?
Yes, of course.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's
You're
been
welcome. Give me 1 second. I want to look over some notes I took and see if there's anything else that
yeah.
I think you would like to know. I tell you, one time I was on vacation in Key West, Florida, by myself, wandering around, and I passed a candy store, and I looked in the candy store, and there was Sir Oliver Humperdinck.
Oh,
So
yes.
I go in the candy store to buy something, and I tell him that I was the photographer for Pro Wrestling Illustrated. And he was like, "You're the only person that would ever think of coming in here and recognizing me.
Right.
I'm here all day long, every day. Nobody has any clue who I am.
Wow.
But I love Key West, so I started a little candy store after I left wrestling. But that was great running into him.
Oh, that's funny. How about the lost
Okay,
art
so
of
I
management?
think I covered a lot of stuff. I hope I wasn't too boring or redundant.
No, some great stories and very informational, which is great. I think the fans will really enjoy it. I know I did.
Okay. I think I was telling you the other day too about Ric Flair, how he always yelled at me whenever I got in the way. I was always getting in the way in Philadelphia and in Baltimore. Whenever we covered the NBA, NWA, or WCW, Ric Flair was like the guy in charge. And he always got mad at me because I was always trying to get great shots of the finish or
Oh,
close
that's
ups.
right.
He always yelled at me and complained to Bill, anybody else but this guy. He's always in the way. Even J.J. Dillon used to get mad as hell at me for being in the way. But the day that I brought my father to a wrestling convention that I think John Arezzi did, um, and I introduced him to my dad, Ric Flair, I introduced to my dad. Ric Flair spoke to my father like he was meeting the President of the United States. He was so respectful, calling him Sir, Mr. London, that I was always grateful for Ric Flair for, as they say, putting me over with my dad.
Yeah.
But as soon as my dad left, it was, God damn it, you're in the way again. If I catch you back here, I'm going to.
Another story you brought up yesterday was, if you want to elaborate on that, traveling with the Macho Man.
Yes, Randy Savage. He was another tough guy that I know a lot of other the guys used to get into arguments with, and he had his own ways. But Randy took a liking to me, and whenever he traveled, he always invited me to have dinner with him or travel with him. And I'm going to even send you a photograph that I have in my collection that the WWE let me have because they think I told them I maybe wanted to be a school teacher one day. But we went into an elementary school in the Brooklyn, New York before a Madison Square Garden show, and Randy Savage, dressed in gimmick, went and talked to all these kids in a rough neighborhood in Brooklyn, and the kids were kind of, ragging him a little bit, going, "We want to see Elizabeth. Where's Elizabeth? Why didn't you bring Elizabeth?"
Right.
And Randy kind of got a little choked up, and he talked to the kids and told them the truth that he had just got a split from Elizabeth. And he explained, kids, when you're with a person for a long time, sometimes you grow in different directions. I mean, I was very touched the way he explained life to these kids. He didn't BS them and give them like a company line. He said, "Yeah, and I'm pretty sad about it myself, but I'm going to get along. I know she will too." And you could see the kids right away knew that he was sincere. And I'll never forget when the guy who was walking us around the school asked Randy, "How long does he have? How much more time does he have?" Randy shrugged his shoulders and said, "I think the matches in the garden start at 8 o'clock." Like he was laughing, like, "I got till 8 o'clock,"
Yeah.
and he wasn't in a hurry, and he talked to all the kids, and he was so sincere. I think that really kind of influenced me to want to become a school teacher.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Macho
I,
was the
and I
first.
love the Macho Man. I read later on that the Macho Man didn't get along with a lot of the wrestlers, and I never saw that in him, but
Yeah.
he was always cool to me, and I always liked him.
I met him as a kid. He was the first wrestler that I ever met, 1991. And
Okay,
yeah, I was
was
at
he
the
nice to you?
Providence. Yeah, he was tremendous, and I was young, but he was just so good and, really took the time.
And I remember once when I was walking through an airport with him, and he had on a nice outfit, colorful outfit with nice cowboy boots, and some kid recognized him from the other side of the airport. And Randy like put one hand on the, like they have like in the bank those. I forgot what you call them in the bank. They're like not a railing, but like a cord that connects with metal stands.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
There's a name for that. Like
The line divider.
anyway, Randy hopped right over that to like go talk to the kid.
Wow.
And then later on, I tried to do it and I almost killed myself. And he was wearing cowboy boots with like wooden heels, and he just like nonchalantly did like a loop, like a leap right over the barricade.
Wow.
And he went over and talked to the kid, and there's nothing he wouldn't do for a kid. But
Yeah,
he wasn't afraid to tell some of the other wrestlers what to do. But he
sure.
was so nice to the kids. And then they told me later on, him and Elizabeth weren't able to have children. So, and they always wanted children. That's why he always had a soft spot for kids.
Yeah.
And I liked him a lot. And I was sorry when he passed because people told me he lived here in Florida. And I known had I gotten a hold of him and asked him to come to the schools and talk to the kids, he would have done it in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
That part I feel bad about. But, Randy, I got along with him. And as I said, I got along with Chief Jay Strongbow, which a lot of people said, stay away from the chief. He wasn't connecting with a lot of people, but he connected with me. He invited me and my wife to have dinner with his family when they had like a WrestleMania party somewhere
Yep.
afterwards. So I got along with the chief. I got along with a lot of people. I still do to this day, even as an elementary school teacher. I get along with the kids that are terrors to all the other teachers. For some reason, I connect with them and
That's
hit it
great.
off.
Hey, lots of great stories, Roy, and
This is wonderful. I really enjoyed this. I always listen to the other podcasts thinking, what would I say if they asked me? What
yeah.
stories would I have? And I didn't realize I had so many till you got me on this tangent here.
Well, it's my pleasure, and we'd love to have you back sometime.
Sure, and I'm looking forward to anything I could ever do to help you. Please let me know. How was Tom Buchanan this morning?
Great to talk to as well. And
Tom's a brilliant guy. Brilliant guy.
yeah,
He knew his photography technology like nobody else I knew.
right.
Like, setting up the lights and the electricity and the circuit breakers and the wattage. Boy, Tom was brilliant. And Tom was an avid skydiver. I don't know if he brought that up, but
We did.
he was jumping. I'd meet him in an airport coming from somewhere else, and he'd have a big bag. And he said, yeah, it's my parachute. I just stopped off and jumped out.
Yep.
A brilliant guy. I would love to hang out with Tom now just to talk about anything but wrestling because he was really knowledgeable. That was one guy I'm sorry I didn't get to know better.
Yeah.
Because he was really a brilliant guy and knew a lot of things about a lot of different things outside of just wrestling and photography.
Sure.
So I hope he's doing well. And Steve Taylor, is a prince. I saw he was selling you some of his old. You showed one thing that Steve gave you of a little miniature billboard from Los Angeles of Hulk Hogan. Remember that?
Yeah.
Steve had one of those in his office, and I begged him every day, "Oh, Steve, if you ever find another one of those are so cool." And I think when I left WWF, he felt bad for me, and he gave it to me.
Oh, wow.
So when I saw you on the internet, I started digging it all over. I have it somewhere in the garage.
Yeah.
That's a cool piece.
It is. Yeah, there aren't a lot of them out there, that's for sure.
And I still have some cool wrestling figures that I bought. I was impressed later on when they came out with Ernie Ladd and Dusty Rhodes.
Right.
And I bought those. And my wife was, well, what do you need those for? What are you, a kid? I said, yeah.
We're all kids at heart, right?
Yep. Joe, I think I have to return this computer that I rented. I think it's due.
Oh, yes. Roy,
listen, this was really a lot of fun and a pleasure. So I really hope this podcast goes well for you and takes off. And if there's anything I could do to help promote it, certainly I will.
I appreciate it. Fans, thanks for joining us. And the great Roy London, thank you so much.
I'm not that great. I'm just a regular, normal guy that got lucky and was in the right place at the right time for a couple of years and had a ball. And I took that knowledge and I put it towards more important things like taking care of children.
Awesome.
I'm the Fred Blassie of the classroom.
Thank you again, Roy.
All right. Be well, Joseph, and God bless.